The spins. They're kind of the worst, and for those of you who haven't reached an age where you've ever had to experience the spins, I genuinely hope you never have to go through them. There's nothing worse than laying down in a bed that you somehow finally managed to get into and realize as you're staring up at the ceiling that the room's moving. The only thing worse than that is the gripping reality that tomorrow is going to be an absolute nightmare and that everything you've done tonight was a mistake. What if there was a way to achieve this incredibly awful experience without the consumption of illicit materials? But what if I told you that there is a way? And now, instead of the existential dread of everything you might have said but forgot you said to a girl that you had a crush on at the bar, there's now just the dark gripping reality that these spins will lead to your death. And genuinely, which is worse, I don't know. Who can say?
But Nick, how do I achieve these death-bringing spins?
Well, the answer is Boruto. Well, more specifically, come into contact with Boruto after he's activated his Rasengan Uzuhiko. Yes, that's right, ladies and gentlemen, because in Chapter 3 of 2 Blue Vortex, which just very recently came out, we learned all about Boruto's new signature move, which is the Rasengan Uzuhiko. Now, for about a month, everybody was speculating about what the Rasengan Uzuhiko was gonna do. In fact, we were so curious about what the Rasengan Uzuhiko was gonna do that a lot of people jumped into Japanese etymology. People had theories that it was a Rasengan that affected the entire universe, because Uzuhiko means universe boy. It's weird, I'll explain it later. With other people believing that Boruto went back in time to add Neji's rotation to a Rasengan to make it both offensive and defensive. Or other people just believing that Boruto was tapped into his Hyuga roots in order to figure out rotation and how to apply that to a Rasengan. Because if you think about it, the rotation of the Byakugan is basically just a really big Rasengan, if only just used defensively. And while all of these theories weren't necessarily correct, there was small pieces of information from every single one of these theories that was correct. Rasengan Uzuhiko does use rotation, just not the Byakugan rotation. Rasengan Uzuhiko does use the universe, but not the universe, but the planet itself. And it does operate both offensively and defensively. But genuinely theorizing exactly what the Rasengan Uzuhiko was gonna do would have been next to impossible, because the Rasengan Uzuhiko is kind of crazy. I mean, genuinely, who would have theorized that Boruto would make an offensive, defensive Rasengan that used the rotation of the Earth? And anytime you came into contact with him, the power of the rotation of the Earth would transfer onto you and make you incredibly dizzy. It just wasn't, given the information that we had, a logical conclusion to come to. But since we have another at least 80 chapters of Boruto ahead of us, and it's now very clear that Boruto's new signature move has been revealed in the form of the Rasengan Uzuhiko, we should probably figure out exactly what the Rasengan Uzuhiko is, how it works, and where it came from. I mean, if Masashi Kishimoto's writing style has taught us anything, we're gonna be seeing a lot of this Rasengan Uzuhiko in the future. I mean, Boruto revealing his Rasengan Uzuhiko in Chapter 2 and Chapter 3 is equivalent to Sasuke using the Chidori for the first time, or Naruto using the Rasengan for the first time. We will see this jutsu used hundreds, if not thousands of more times before the story is over, which is why today we're doing a catch-all on all things Rasengan Uzuhiko. Today we're gonna be answering the question of how the Rasengan Uzuhiko works, where it came from, and how Boruto learned it in the first place. Before we get to explaining anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you like the idea of me breaking down the moves of your favorite anime characters, guys, you're gonna love my other channel, The Weeb Commander, where instead of talking about Naruto and Boruto, I talk all other anime. And if you just like the idea of me talking about anime, you're gonna love my anime podcast, Otaku's Anonymous, where me and Danny Mata break down everything that happened in anime this week. It's available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. And if you want to look like somebody who talks about anime, go ahead and pop into my brand new anime merch store, where you can pick up some of the greatest anime sweatshirts, t-shirts, and sticker packs known to man. But before we get into all that, today we gotta talk about my favorite recurring sponsor to the page, Factor. Listen, fall time is a busy time for all of us. Whether it be school, work picking up, the days getting shorter and therefore making you feel like you have less time to accomplish things, whatever it is, for some reason, fall is hectic. See, with Factor, you can skip the extra trip to the grocery store. You can skip the chopping, the cutting, the sauteing, the plating, the everything, all without sacrificing flavor or nutritional quality. That's because with Factor, you can have fresh, never frozen, dietitian-approved meals in 2 minutes. So all you have to do is unsheath, heat, and enjoy. But Factor understands that a couple of you are your bougiest selves, which is why they've begun to offer something known as the Gourmet Plus options. Upscale meals prepared by professional chefs that are ready for you in no time. Treat yourself to upscale and easy meals that feature fancy ingredients like broccolini and truffle butter. Or if you're looking for something a bit more calorie conscious, all of Factor's meals clock in at under 550 calories. See, I love having Factor as a sponsor because they're a product that I use all the time. When balancing the incredibly hectic life of filming 5 YouTube videos and a podcast every single week, I don't always have time to cook the nutritious meals that I need to keep this schedule going, which is where Factor comes in huge. Factor allows me to not only not worry about what I have in the fridge, but also not worry about being crunched on time. It allows me to not only hit my nutritional goals, but also my professional goals, all with meals that taste delicious. And because of that, I can say pretty wholeheartedly that without Factor, I probably wouldn't be able to keep up this schedule. But there's a big difference between seeing and believing. So let's take a trip on down to the kitchen.
Today we're going to be cooking up and eating the jalapeno beef mac and cheese. Let me show you just how easy it is to prepare these meals. All I gotta do is slide off that protective layer, punch a couple of holes in the film like so, microwave on high for 2 to 3 minutes. I like to split the diff, and it'll be done soon.
And it's done, so let's try it. That is good. It's well seasoned. It's got a little spice. That cheese is creamy. Let's try the broccoli. It's cooked perfectly. Also, well seasoned.
So what are you guys waiting for? Head to factor75.com or use the link in my description and use code NCHammer2350 at checkout to get 50% off your first box today. That's factor75.com or use the link in my description and enter code NCHammer2350 for 50% off your first box today. It's about time we save time and eat right. So chapter 3 of 2 Blue Vortex is out, and a lot happened. Boruto mollywopped code. Boruto versus Kawaki appears as though it's gonna be starting in chapter 4. Boruto has toads, the Ten Tails looks like a mini ghetto statue, and people can turn into trees and survive. But out of everything that happened in 2 Blue Vortex, 2 things rose to the top in terms of importance. The first and probably most important thing that happened in chapter 3 was the reveal that Boruto has toads, which could mean a litany of different things. It could mean that Boruto's working with Kashin Koji. It could mean that Mount Mobuko wasn't affected by Ada's brainwashing, and so on and so forth. But we've already done an entire video about the toads and what the toads could mean, which means that today's video should be dedicated to talking about the second most important thing that happened in chapter 3, and that was a reveal of the Rasengan Uzuhiko and how it worked. And genuinely, while I did understand the explanation of how the Rasengan Uzuhiko works, even I still have a lot of questions about how the Rasengan Uzuhiko works. See, because I can say when I hit you with sword, it cut you in half, but that really doesn't answer the question of why is that sword so powerful? How did the sword get made? Why is the sword stronger than my skin? And unfortunately, in the case of chapter 3, and in the case of the explanation of the Rasengan Uzuhiko, as is relatively standard with Masashi Kishimoto's writing, we didn't get a super fleshed out and scientific answer as to how the technique works. Sure, we heard that the Rasengan Uzuhiko uses the power of the rotation of Earth, but what does that mean exactly? Well, today we're going to try our best to explain exactly what I believe it to mean and what that means for Boruto. So the questions that we want to answer today is, how does it work? Where did Boruto get it, and why is it fatal? Because here's the thing, I understand why a Rasengan or a Chidori is fatal, on account of either your entire ribcage has been crushed in, or I just punched a hole through your chest. I don't necessarily understand why getting dizzy would kill somebody, and we really don't get an answer. So while today is going to start with a lot of concrete evidence and breaking down exactly what we know as Masashi Kishimoto has laid it out for us, it's probably going to end with a little bit of speculation because we don't have all the answers and sometimes we have to find them ourselves. So let's start with what we do know. Let's answer the question of how does it work? Well, upon Boruto's activation of Rasengan Uzuhiko, we see a bunch of swirls begin to surround his body. And these swirls are the Rasengan. See, the reason that a lot of people speculated that the Rasengan would be able to use the entire power of the universe is because Rasengan Uzuhiko is a kind of unique name for a Rasengan. See, Uzu in Japanese etymology means the universe, while Hiko just kind of means boy. Well, it's not entirely true. Let me explain. See, Hiko doesn't mean boy, but Hiko is an incredibly common ending to boys' names. There's really no comparison in English, but I guess the best comparison would be like Sue existing at the end of only female names, like Mary Sue or Tammy Sue, or I don't know. Like I said, there's not a lot of great comparisons, but just know if somebody's name is something like Yamahiko in Japan, that's probably a man. And therefore, the best English translation for Uzuhiko is kind of universe boy. But the real best explanation is if you wanted to name a boy after the universe, you would name them Uzuhiko. And now we understand how Rasengan Uzuhiko works. This explanation actually makes a lot of sense, because Boruto's utilization of this technique requires him to surround himself with the power of the rotation of the Earth. And while Uzu doesn't exactly necessarily translate to Earth, the Earth can be referred to as the universe. So it would make sense that Boruto's technique surrounds him, the boy, with the power of the universe. And while that might seem like a defensive ability initially, and to a certain degree it is, the real strength of Rasengan Uzuhiko comes from the fact that if anybody comes into contact with Boruto while it's activated, the power of the rotation of Earth that is surrounding Boruto latches onto them. And while initially that probably doesn't sound so bad, in fact, it kind of sounds like a boost for the person who's now having the power of the rotation of the Earth latch onto their body, it is a bad thing. In fact, it's a very bad thing. In fact, it's a fatally bad thing. As anybody who has the power of the rotation of the Earth surge onto them by coming into contact with Boruto immediately gets very dizzy, like world spinning upside down dizzy, like one of the strongest people in the entire universe unable to attack a stationary person dizzy. And that's just one of the aspects of Rasengan Uzuhiko, the defensive aspect. Now, the offensive aspect of Rasengan Uzuhiko is kind of just the standard Rasengan. See, the rotational energy that surrounds Boruto's body can be concentrated into his palm, which he can then use to attack people with what would appear to be a somewhat standard Rasengan type attack, with the obvious added benefit that in order to land this Rasengan-like attack, he has to come in contact with you. And since Boruto has now come into contact with you, the rotational power that's surrounding him transfers to you, and thus we re-enter the dizzy cycle. So really, when it comes down to it, if you touch Boruto or he touches you, you get the rotational energy of Earth latched onto you, which not only makes you dizzier than you've ever been in your entire life, but also apparently will eventually kill you. So the TLDR of all of it is that Boruto has created somehow the perfect defensive/offensive mechanism that simply requires him to either be touched or touch somebody to eventually signal their death. It's broken, incredibly disgustingly broken. You know, unless you have like any ranged abilities whatsoever, and then you can just like kind of keep them far away. Kind of gotta fight Boruto like you had to fight Hidan. And that's how Rasengan Uzuhiko works. Now, the reason I put how in quotation marks here is because it's kind of a ninja magic explanation. Oh, I'm using the rotational power of the Earth to surround myself in its energy, and if I hit you, that energy transfers to you. Cool. Sick answer. Now, how does it work? Now, the scientific way to answer this question is that Boruto is using the kinetic energy of a rotating planet, which would be absolutely insane. Now, if hypothetically Boruto was able to access the kinetic energy of a rotating planet, he would pretty easily be scaled immediately into the planetary category if he didn't already have him there. So the real scientific answer would be that somehow Boruto is tapping into the rotational kinetic energy of any planet that he exists on, and he's transferring that kinetic energy into anybody he hits. Now, in order to explain the kinetic energy of a rotating planet, I gotta do a slight hypothetical for you here. So the planet that we exist on, Earth, right now rotates at 1,000 miles an hour. But because we're on the planet and because this planet has gravity, we are also rotating at 1,000 miles an hour. Now, one of Newton's incredible laws is that an object in motion stays in motion, and we are in a perpetual state of motion, which is why we don't feel like we're in motion. However, if one day the planet were to just stop rotating, everybody would be flung in the direction of the rotation at 1,000 miles an hour. And unless you were next to the world's longest and softest, for some reason, horizontal foam pit, you would die. Imagine for a second that somehow you were dropped from the outer atmosphere and there was a pole, let's call it a flagpole, rotating along with the Earth. And let's say for a second, for some reason, you were unaffected by the Earth's gravity, and instead somehow you were simply just falling towards the Earth in a straight line. So this is the Earth rotating, right? If you were to fall from the upper atmosphere, usually you fall with the rotation of the Earth, as the gravity of the Earth would pull you in a straight line, and that straight line is altered by by the rotation of the Earth. Let's say, assuming that we're ignoring all laws of physics, that for some reason you're not pulled into the curve. And let's say you're going to get hit by this corner where the flagpole is. So you would get hit with the entirety of the kinetic energy of the planet, assuming that the flagpole has infinite durability. Now, the reason that you would get hit with the entirety of the kinetic energy of the Earth is because the entirety of the force of the Earth needs to be spun, which means that every single object on this Earth, assuming that it's bound in an invincible manner to the Earth, is spinning with the Earth's entire kinetic energy. Now, since kinetic energy is altered by speed, if the Earth was only spinning at 500 miles an hour, that kinetic energy would be halved. But since you are falling completely unaffected by the torque of the Earth, you would be hit by all 1,000 miles an hour of the Earth's rotation. And if you take the entirety of the mass of Earth and times it by 1,000 miles an hour to get how much kinetic energy happens through the Earth rotating, you'll get about 50 exatons of force, which doesn't mean a lot to any of you, but just know it's enough to destroy the moon. So like I said, assuming that this flagpole is completely invincible and affixed into the Earth, you would be hit with enough force to destroy the moon. And if we're going by the scientific letter of the law, considering the fact that Boruto was saying he's using the rotation of the Earth in his Rasengan, that is possibly what he's doing, using the entire kinetic energy of the Earth to lay into people. Now, technically, this isn't insane, because currently you, me, and everything else on Earth carries all of the kinetic energy of the Earth. But the problem is everything else on Earth also carries the kinetic energy of everything else on Earth, and we're all heading the same direction, which means that the only kinetic differences that we can apply to others are kinetic differences that we generate with our own mass and speed, as the rotation of the Earth is everybody's baseline. But if Boruto was able to nullify even a little bit somebody's baseline, then any punch or transference of kinetic energy he dealt that person would seem like a lot more. Another possible way that this could work is that, yes, obviously we all carry all of the kinetic energy of a rotating planet. However, none of us are like that flagpole. We're not invincible and we're not fixed into the Earth. Our bodies give out when we make contact with something because every action has an equal and opposite reaction. And we are not a permanent fixture in the ground. If something hits us, we fall over or we bend. And all of these things are done to dampen kinetic energy and its effect on our body. However, if in a perfect scenario, Boruto was able to make himself a fixture in the ground and be an invincible, undampened force like our flagpole, then Boruto would be able to transfer 100% of the rotational energy of Earth, something that no human can do. It's not even something that a flagpole with its base a mile into the Earth's crust could do. As, let's say, hypothetically, we hit that flagpole, the flagpole would bend, which would dampen the kinetic energy output onto our falling person from the outer stratosphere. Let's just assume that Boruto can do it, maximizing 100% of the kinetic energy of a rotating Earth, or dampening the possible effect that gravity has on other people to make their kinetic baseline lower. Either way, Boruto in a best case scenario is outputting roughly 50 exatons of force, enough to destroy a moon. And that's if we assume that the Rasengan Uzuhiko is actually operating in a more kinetic-based fashion. See, because here's the thing, even that isn't really confirmed. See, while it's said over and over and over again that the Rasengan Uzuhiko uses the rotation of the Earth, it really hasn't been painted out for us whether or not that rotation of the Earth powers, talking about the kinetic energy, or just the fact that when Boruto touches you with this technique, you get dizzy. And it could really go either way, because just in the same way that Boruto could be landing out punches that could destroy moons, the Rasengan Uzuhiko could also just have the ability to make the way that you feel the speed of the Earth feel inconsistent. Because, like I've already said, we're all moving at 1,000 miles an hour, and we don't feel it because we've always been doing that. However, if there was a possibility that Boruto could make you feel as though you were moving at 950 miles an hour or 800 miles an hour, and then crank that back up to 1,000, and so on and so forth, you would be stuck in a constant perpetual battle against gravity itself, as your brain would feel as though it was moving 100 miles an hour faster or 200 miles an hour slower, and so on and so forth. And assuming that Boruto's Rasengan Uzuhiko doesn't have actual gravity manipulation ability, your body would still operate in the way that it's operated forever. That is to say that you wouldn't be flung across a room at 200 miles an hour just to come back at 300 miles an hour. But instead, you would exist as a regular human as you've existed your entire life, but you would feel as though you were accelerating and decelerating massively, which is kind of what we see happen to Code. I mean, Code gets dizzy, and I don't think dizzy is necessarily the way that an experience like this would make you feel. Well, at least the way that it was depicted in the Boruto manga, where Boruto is spinning upside down in Code's POV. But it definitely would make you unstable, because you would be constantly pulled or pushed in one singular direction. And that is the direction in which the Earth is spinning, which is eastward. And unfortunately, your orientation wouldn't change that. So let's say I would be getting pulled at Goku, regardless of which way I'm looking. And assuming that we're constantly either decelerating or accelerating how that spin effect works, I would either feel as though I was being pushed or pulled towards Goku perpetually, which, like I said, probably wouldn't feel like the spins, but would definitely be massively disorienting. So which is it? How does the Rasengan Uzuhiko work? Does it work by using the entire kinetic energy of the Earth, or does it just mess with your coordination? Well, unfortunately, there's kind of evidence for both sides. See, in chapter 3, Ada is watching the battle between Code and Boruto, and she remarks that the Rasengan Uzuhiko is kind of boring, and that it operates a lot like a standard Rasengan. But Daemon, who's watching the fight, but not like watching the fight with his eyes, but like kind of feeling the fight through the ground, says, and I quote, "The shaking of the ground, is it Boruto? Nah. Rather than the ground, it's the planet." And I don't know why planet is always in quotation marks. This is a move using the planet's rotation, which is also in quotation marks, which would tell us that Daemon is saying that the ground itself isn't shaking, but instead the entire planet, because he says the shaking of the ground. Nah, it's not the ground, it's the planet, which would imply to us that the Rasengan Uzuhiko has the ability to shake the entire planet, which would pay credence to the idea that the Rasengan Uzuhiko focuses on using the kinetic energy of an entire rotating planet. And that's kind of corroborated by the fact that after Boruto hits Code with an offensive application of the Rasengan Uzuhiko, Code stands back up, and Boruto says, "I'm surprised that you can stand back up after being hit by that." But unfortunately, that could also be because Code should be too dizzy to stand up. And basically everything, as it applies to the Rasengan Uzuhiko, pointed towards the fact that it just makes you dizzy. But since Code is one of the strongest people in the Boruto universe, is pretty easily planetary, at least so far as durability goes, being hit by a technique which would have the ability to destroy a moon wouldn't be that big of an issue for Code. I mean, Naruto in the last tanked a shot from Tenari that cut the moon in half, which meant that in the last Naruto had moon level durability, which leads a lot of people to believe that Naruto's AP is also somewhere around moon in the last. And then Naruto traded shots with Momoshiki in base form and probably had a higher durability and AP than him. And then other people like Jigen absolutely embarrassed Naruto in his strongest forms, which led him to have to use things like Baryon mode, all of which made him stronger than Ishiki. However, Code without his limiters was said to be stronger than Ishiki, which is why the limiters had to be placed on him in the first place. And the version of Code that Naruto hit is the strongest version of Code, karma marking activated Code. So if Code's stronger than Ishiki, who's roughly as strong as Baryon mode Naruto, who's way stronger than Naruto and Naruto the Last, then Code's durability is probably well above Mu. So unfortunately, Code standing back up from this attack doesn't really prove anything in either direction. So best case scenario, Rasengan Uzuhiko is able to dole out 50 exatons of force. Worst case scenario, it makes you dizzy. All right, cool. So now we understand both the ninja explanation and the scientific explanation of how Rasengan Uzuhiko might work. Which brings us to our second question: where did Boruto get it? Because the Rasengan Uzuhiko, it's weird. Listen, there's a lot of weird non-ninja-like abilities in Naruto. I mean, the problem really started in Shippuden, with the introductions of things like the Susanoo and KCM1 and 2 and the Kurama Avatar mode. Things got crazy and very un-ninja-like rather quickly. And Boruto is no better, with the introductions of things like the karma marking and the Jogon. So Boruto having an ability that uses the power of a rotating Earth isn't the craziest thing of all time, but the problem is, who would teach him that? Like, you can learn how to use Susanoo because people have been using MS abilities for thousands of years. You can learn how to become a perfect Jinchuriki because we've been doing that for a couple of generations. And while these techniques weren't necessarily ninja-like, there was a way to explain how we got to them. What's the baseline for figuring out how to use the rotational ability of the Earth? Is that an MS ability? Is that a Sage thing? And in actuality, it might be a Sage thing. See, there are 4 possible answers to how Boruto learned the Rasengan Uzuhiko. Technically, there's 5, but the 4 possible answers I want to talk about today are Kashin Koji, the Toads, Itachi, and Shibai. Yes, I'm fully aware that's an incredibly wide-reaching spectrum. Well, then you're probably wondering, Nick, what was the 5th option? And the 5th option is Sasuke, but I don't really believe this option is worth fleshing out, and I'll cover why right now. Now, obviously, there is a distinct possibility that the person who taught Boruto Rasengan Uzuhiko was Sasuke. And considering the fact that Sasuke is a master of offensive defensive abilities, it would make a lot of sense that Sasuke would teach Boruto the Rasengan Uzuhiko, because Sasuke is a wielder of Susanoo, the ultimate offensive defensive ability. And Sasuke has taken it one step further than that, being able to coat his Susanoo and Kagutsuchi, making his already incredibly broken offensive defensive ability that much more defensive, because now not only does he have one of the strongest defensive abilities in the entire Naruto universe, but you can't even hit that defensive ability because it's covered in Amaterasu. And yes, we could obviously say that Sasuke using his Kagutsuchi Susanoo ribcage is very similar to Boruto using Rasengan Uzuhiko. That's really the only real similarities are in premise, not in application. On top of this, I don't think that Sasuke has the skill set or the narrative reasoning to be the one who taught Boruto Rasengan Uzuhiko, because for one, I believe that Sasuke being the one who taught him would kind of be a boring answer. Like, oh yeah, the guy I left with for maybe 3 years was the one who taught me this new broken ability. I mean, yeah, it's a possibility and it would make sense to a small degree, but it's just kind of boring. And the second reason, and probably the more concrete and reasonable reason, is that Boruto said that the Rasengan Uzuhiko uses the chakra of the earth. Now, we could sit here and speculate about what the chakra of the earth is and talk all about how it's a completely separate thing from Senjutsu chakra, but is it? Like, yes, there's a possibility that Boruto is simply talking about using the Earth's power, and that's what he meant by the chakra of the Earth. But by the letter of the law, the chakra of the Earth is nature energy. The Earth has chakra. Everything on Earth has chakra, but it's referred to as nature energy. You take that chakra into your body, you mix it with your own chakra, and you make Senjutsu chakra. So if Rasengan Uzuhiko does subscribe to even some sage tenets, Sasuke is not a great guy to teach you that, because while Sasuke did have a curse mark for a long time that allowed him to tap into Senjutsu chakra, that wasn't him doing it, that was Orochimaru. Sasuke isn't a sage, so while I acknowledge the fact that it could possibly be Sasuke, I don't think that it was. Which leads us to our 4 other options. Now, with these 4 options, unfortunately, the more fun they get, the less realistic they get. That's life. So let's start with the most realistic, least fun answer, which would be Kashin Koji. Now, this isn't like an unfun answer, it's just incredibly logical and the most likely. Because, like we've said for a long time, Kashin Koji was purposely saved in his battle against Ishiki. And now with Boruto showing up with toads in chapter 3, it's all but inevitable that he's either connected to Kashin Koji or Mount Muabuko. Because otherwise, where is he getting the toads? And while we've already made an entire video about the possibility of Boruto training with Kashin Koji during the time skip, so I'm not gonna go over in deep detail about how Boruto ended up with Kashin Koji. If you want to hear about that, go to my last video. Kashin Koji, like I've already stated, was kept alive on purpose, and he's insanely powerful and has shown the ability to use jutsus and techniques that we've never seen before. See, Kashin Koji in his battle against Jigen/Ishiki showed some incredible moves, like his true fire of Samadhi, which is essentially just Amaterasu. It creates inextinguishable flames. On top of this, apparently he went to a mountain which is perpetually on fire and captured some of the fire to use in a battle against Ishiki, because he knew that Ishiki wouldn't be able to shrink actual fire. On top of this, unlike the person that he's a clone of, he's a perfect Toad Sage. And considering the narrative connection here between Boruto and Naruto, that Boruto would train with Kashin Koji, just like Naruto trained with Jiraiya, narratively it would make sense that at some point or another, Boruto would end up with Kashin Koji. And since Kashin Koji is a perfect Toad Sage, who would be better to teach Boruto how to tap into the chakra of the earth than Kashin Koji. It also makes sense narratively when you consider the fact that Sasuke was probably the person who battled against Code 1 year into the time skip, and Sasuke probably didn't make it out of that battle against Code. So Boruto would have needed a new teacher, and that new teacher probably came in the form of Kashin Koji. So Kashin Koji, who's a cyborg, incredibly powerful, a perfect sage, and has a bunch of abilities we've never seen before, has the skill set and knowledge to teach Boruto how to tap into the chakra of the earth and create Rasengan Uzuhiko. That, to me, feels like the most likely answer, which is kind of crazy when you consider the fact that the entire theory is predicated on the fact that Boruto ended up with Kashin Koji in the time skip, which is something that we haven't confirmed yet. But still, it feels very likely to me. But the second answer is a bit more fun, but unfortunately a bit less logical, and that's that the toads of Mount Muabuko taught Boruto how to use Rasengan Uzuhiko. See, I personally subscribe to the theory that Kashin Koji was never connected to Mount Muabuko. Once again, talked a whole lot about that in my last video. So after the battle that Sasuke, Boruto, and Code have 1 year into the time skip, instead of being adopted by Kashin Koji, Boruto was instead adopted by the toads, who, in a very similar capacity to Kashin Koji, teach him all about sage and senjutsu principles. And by tapping into the chakra of the earth through the medium of the teachings of the toads of Mount Muabuko, Boruto then figures out Rasengan Uzuhiko. Essentially just replace Kashin Koji with the Toads. Now, unfortunately, this one is a bit less realistic, because if hypothetically Boruto just ended up with the Toads of Mount Muabuko, they would probably just teach him Sage Mode. I mean, it's what they've done for everybody else in the history of people who have ended up in Mount Muabuko, so why would they change for Boruto? And it's a possibility they did teach him Sage Mode, or he was unable to learn Sage Mode because he didn't have a strong enough body, or enough chakra, as having enough chakra is also essential to becoming a sage. So he just took the idea of tapping into nature energy and applied it to something else like the Rasengan Uzuhiko. That is a possibility. And that possibility is a bit more fun than him ending up with Kashin Koji, because that possibility lends more to the possibility that Boruto ends up a sage. But let's keep heading down into Crazy Town, because Crazy Town is more fun objectively. The third possibility for how Boruto figured out Rasengan Uzuhiko is Shibai.
Nick, are you saying that Shibai descended down from whatever universe he existed in for those 3 years and decided to teach Boruto how to use Rasengan Uzuhiko?
No. However, there is a long-standing theory, a theory that I've made videos about, that Boruto is more connected to Shibai than we think. See, Boruto obviously inherited the Jogan, and as to why he inherited the Jogan, we just don't know. However, on top of this, when Boroshiki pulls up, for some reason, Boruto doesn't get Momoshiki's horns. He instead gets one horn that's eerily reminiscent of Shibai's horns. And when you consider the fact that Kawaki manifested Ishiki's horn to a T every time he ever pulled out that Karma form, Boruto not manifesting Momoshiki's horns has always been weird. So somebody reached out to me recently and very aptly made the realization that Rasengan Uzuhiko actually looks eerily similar to something that we've seen Shibai kind of use. Because in the one image that we ever got of Shibai that wasn't him floating as some giant godlike deity with a wall of Jogan behind him, we see that he too is surrounded by a spiral-like entity, very similar in fashion to Boruto's Rasengan Uzuhiko. So this third possibility states that Boruto tapped into the Shibai side of his power, and by tapping into this Shibai side of his power, he was able to get a possibly diluted version of the ability we saw Shibai using in the one panel we've seen of it. As we obviously don't know why Shibai was being surrounded by these wisps, very similar to that of Rasengan Uzuhiko. And in actuality, Shibai could have also been using the rotational kinetic energy of the Earth. And considering the fact that Rasengan Uzuhiko has the ability to make anybody that Boruto comes into contact with incredibly dizzy, it kind of sounds like a Shinjutsu, so it being tied to Shibai would make a fair amount of sense. But you know what wouldn't make sense but would also be incredibly fun? Is if instead of Shibai or Kashin Koji or the Toads, that Boruto actually learned this ability from Itachi.
But Nick, Itachi's dead.
Only in the modern day, like we all know, in Boruto, at least in Boruto anime canon, there is a time-traveling turtle. And this time-traveling turtle is used by the Otsutsuki to slide through time. Now, this time-traveling turtle was introduced during the Oroshiki arc in the Boruto anime canon. And Oroshiki was trying to use this time-traveling turtle to run up on Naruto when he was still young. I was gonna say when he was still a genin, but he's still a genin, as a 12-year-old Naruto presents a lot less issues than a 30-year-old Naruto. Now, technically, after the Time Traveler's arc, this time-traveling turtle was sent on a journey of self-exploration. However, ever since Chapter 2 of 2 Blue Vortex was released, a lot of people, yours included, have began to speculate that Boruto is a time traveler, and that in actuality, the black speck that we see during the 4th Great Shinobi World War behind Obito is Boruto, watching the events of the 4th Great Shinobi World War, which would explain why Boruto knows about the horrors of the Ten Tails, and would actually make a fair amount of sense when you consider the fact that Boruto was trying to escape the reaches of Ada's Senrigan, and the 4th Great Shinobi World War happened before Ada was born. So if we're assuming that Boruto is a time traveler, and that maybe Boruto lost Sasuke a year into the time skip, it's a possibility that Sasuke would send Boruto back in time to train with the one person he trusted more than anybody else on Earth, Itachi. And actually, thematically, this would make a lot of sense, because Boruto and Itachi's stories are eerily similar. Both were exiled from their villages for doing objectively nothing wrong. However, they were placed in situations that were above their heads, but they operated in darkness for the betterment of Konoha. And yes, I'm aware, Itachi killed his entire clan, but that wasn't because he wanted to, he was forced to. So Sasuke, upon identifying that Boruto would find a lot of likeness in Itachi, sent him back in time to train with Itachi. But there's a lot more to this possible explanation than thematic similarities between Itachi and Boruto. See, the Rasengan Uzuhiko is eerily similar to one thing and one thing alone in the entirety of the Naruto universe, and that's something that Itachi has. And that something is the realm of drunken dreams. Dreams. See, the realm of Drunken Dreams is a pocket dimension that Itachi Susanoo has that exists in a sake bottle that he keeps on the hip of his Susanoo. Now, the sake bottle technically doubles as a sheath for the sword of Totsuka. So in order to pull out the sword of Totsuka, he has to pull it out of this sake bottle. Now, because of this, whenever Itachi impales somebody with the sword of Totsuka, it seals them in the realm of Drunken Dreams, which is inside of the sheath of the sword of Totsuka, also known as the sake bottle. And if you're sealed in the realm of Drunken Dreams, your soul exists in the sake bottle forever. And the reason that it's called the realm of Drunken Dreams is that because after you enter this realm of Drunken Dreams, your soul becomes incredibly dizzy for as long as you exist in this realm, which is either forever or however long Itachi survives. We don't really know. Like, Orochimaru did get sealed in there, but Itachi died directly after. But there are theories that the version of Orochimaru we have now is a clone. So did Boruto get sent back in time to a person with an incredibly similar backstory to him by Sasuke and managed to pseudo-copy one of Itachi's abilities, the realm of Drunken Dreams. Or did Kashinkochi just happen to teach him how to tap into the power of the earth and Boruto applied that to a Rasengan? We don't know, and we probably won't know for a while, but what do you think, guys? Tell me in the comments below, and while you're down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. They never should have introduced the turtle. I get that it was done in anime canon, but I'm always gonna be like, they could have gone back in time.